The morning air carried a damp stillness that clung to the earth like dew on grass. It was the kind of silence that whispered trouble to those who listened closely, the kind that made a veteran officer like Sergeant Maria Owens sit up a little straighter in her patrol car. She sipped lukewarm coffee from a stained thermos and tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, eyes scanning the tree line outside of town where old oaks grew dense and secrets were known to hide. It had been a slow morning in Fairview, a town so small it boasted one traffic light and more tractors than sedans. Most mornings, calls were limited to lost cats or elderly folks forgetting how to reset their VCR clocks. But today, the radio crackled alive with something different, urgent, shaky static layered with the dispatcher's alarmed voice. All units report we have a 1070 in Sector 6. Repeat 1070, officer possibly down. K9 unit may be compromised. The words hit Maria like a punch to the ribs. She instantly reached for her radio, pressing the button before the thought even fully formed. This is Unit 3. I'm 2 minutes from Sector 6. Heading out now. She tossed her thermos onto the passenger seat, sirens lighting up the sleepy neighborhood. Sector 6 wasn't far, a wooded area on the outskirts of town used for training exercises and patrols. The K9 unit assigned there was a new addition to Fairview's modest force. Officer Ben Riker, fresh from city duty, had transferred with his partner, a sleek German shepherd named Shadow. The duo had become fast favorites, especially Shadow, whose intelligence and discipline brought quiet awe to local kids and hardened officers alike. Maria's tires screeched around the corner, and as she pulled onto the dirt road winding toward the training fields, the hairs on the back of her neck stood straight. Something was wrong. The deeper she drove, the thicker the air became, not with fog, but with that visceral tension only cops understood, the sense that something was broken, off, tainted. She parked at the edge of the field and stepped out, hand instinctively resting on her holster. There was no sound except the rustle of wind through tall grass. Then she saw it. Limping from the tree line, shoulders heaving with every labored breath, came Shadow. The sight was heartbreaking. His coat, usually a sheen of black and tan pride, was matted with blood and dirt. His left hind leg dragged awkwardly behind him, and one ear was torn, hanging slightly. But what drew Maria's eye wasn't the injuries. It was what he carried. Gripped in his bloodied teeth was a black, tactical backpack too large for him. Dragging in the soil, Shadow staggered forward, clearly in pain but determined, his eyes locked with Maria's, not frantic, but pleading. There was purpose in his struggle.
Shadow,
she called, running forward. The dog didn't speed up or flinch. He merely continued his crawl toward her until he was a foot away. Then, with the last of his strength, he collapsed at her feet, the backpack landing beside him. Maria dropped to her knees, emotion swelling in her throat. Oh my God. Shadow. Where's Ben? Where's your partner? Where she looked around, but the field was empty. No sign of movement. No rustling. No Ben. Shadow whimpered softly, lifting his head slightly and nudging the backpack with his nose before letting it rest again. Maria immediately radioed in. This is Unit 3. I've located K9 Shadow. Officer Riker is not in sight. I repeat, officer is MIA. Shadow is injured and brought a backpack, requesting emergency medical and backup. Location Sector 6, clearing by the training tower. As the dispatcher acknowledged the call, Maria turned her attention to the backpack. She hesitated for a moment. Why would a wounded K9 drag a backpack all this way? What was in it? She unzipped it slowly, heart pounding with each tug. The first thing she noticed was a stack of papers, loose, hastily shoved in. Then a child's drawing, folded and slightly torn. Next came a flash drive taped to the inside lining and a crumpled piece of notebook paper with 4 haunting words scrawled in shaky handwriting. They're not who you think. Maria stared at the words, her brain struggling to process them as a gust of wind carried the scent of copper and sweat. Shadow let out a soft growl, not at her, but at the woods behind them, a warning. Within minutes, backup arrived. EMTs loaded Shadow into the mobile unit with care, already calling for a veterinary trauma team to meet them. Officers fanned out, canvassing the woods. Drones were deployed. Helicopters scrambled. But Ben Riker was nowhere to be found. As hours passed and search efforts intensified, Maria returned to the precinct with the backpack in tow. Chief Danvers met her in the conference room, his usual relaxed demeanor absent. He was a grizzled man nearing retirement and had never looked more concerned. Maria laid the contents of the backpack on the table. A dog doesn't drag something miles through the woods bleeding just to play fetch. He was protecting this like his life depended on it. Danvers examined the note and the flash drive. The words carried weight. They weren't just scribbled. They were etched in fear. They're not who you think. Who's they? Danvers muttered. Maria shook her head. I don't know yet. But Shadow wanted us to see this. Danvers sighed and looked at the flash drive. Let's see what the hell we're dealing with. It took the department tech only a few minutes to access the drive. What they found sent a chill through every officer in the room. The files were recordings, hidden body cam footage not registered in standard logs. They showed interactions between Ben and several other officers. Conversations filled with innuendo, veiled threats, and more overt mentions of something deeply corrupt. Drug seizures that never made it to evidence lockers. Confidential informants being intimidated. A pay for protection scheme targeting local immigrant-run businesses. Names were mentioned, names of officers who wore the same uniform as Maria. Suddenly, everything began to click. The late-night meetings, the rushed reports, the overly aggressive raids. Ben had uncovered something vile and dangerous, and apparently he had no intention of staying silent. But he had known he wouldn't be safe. That's why he prepared this. That's why he must have instructed Shadow to get it to the department if anything happened. It was a contingency plan, one that only a dog could carry out, and he had. Later that night, Maria visited Shadow at the veterinary center. He had undergone surgery and lay sedated but stable. She sat beside his cage, tears sliding down her cheek as she gently ran a hand over his bandaged paw. You saved us, you know that? She whispered. You knew who you could trust. You brought us the truth. In the days that followed, the precinct exploded in investigation. Internal affairs arrived. The state called in federal oversight. Arrests were made. Officers were suspended, some even in handcuffs, and a purge unlike anything Fairview had seen grip the town. But amid the chaos, the people rallied. Candles were lit for Ben. Murals appeared in alleys and underpasses, showing Shadow with bright eyes and wings. Children placed toy badges at the base of a bronze statue being built in the square. It wasn't just about a crime uncovered. It was about loyalty, about love, about a wounded dog that refused to let the truth die with his partner. Shadow was later awarded the Medal of Bravery, an honor usually reserved for human officers. He walked onto the stage months later, limping but proud, tail wagging with a softness that melted the crowd. Maria gave the speech that day. Sometimes it's not the loudest voice that speaks the greatest truth. Sometimes it's a silent hero, bleeding and broken, carrying the weight of justice in his teeth. Today, we don't just honor a K9. We honor the spirit of loyalty, of courage, and of love that refuses to quit, even when it hurts. The crowd stood in thunderous applause. Shadow barked once, a quiet echo of all that had been lost and all that had been found. And so, in a little town named Fairview, a dog reminded everyone that heroism wears many faces, and sometimes The one who saves the day, walks on four legs, and never speaks a word. The hum of fluorescent lights in the evidence room was a familiar sound, sterile and indifferent, like the walls that kept secrets sealed behind metal lockers. Officer Maria Owens stood in front of locker 17, the same one she'd secured the backpack in 3 days earlier. She held the combination code in her hand, though she had memorized it within the first hour of returning to the precinct. Something about the backpack wouldn't leave her alone. The flash drive had already shaken the department to its core. Internal Affairs was now stationed at the precinct full-time, and a handful of suspensions had turned into a full-blown investigation with regional oversight. Officers she trusted, had laughed with, drank coffee beside, even once attended weddings with, were now subjects of criminal inquiry. But that backpack, she couldn't shake the feeling that it held more. She twisted the combination, heard the satisfying click, and slowly opened the door. There it was, torn, blood-stained, but intact. She pulled it out carefully and carried it to the evidence table, snapping on gloves as she went. This time she wasn't rushed. No sirens. No wounded dog at her feet. Just her and the truth waiting to be uncovered. She laid everything out again, this time with purpose. The crumpled drawing from a child. The note that had chilled her to the bone. They're not who you think. And now she noticed something she'd missed earlier. The inside flap of the backpack had a narrow inner pouch, nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. With cautious fingers, she unzipped it. Tucked inside was a USB stick, different from the one she had already viewed, and a single photograph. It was an old Polaroid, edges curled and colors slightly faded. It showed a young boy, no more than 6, standing next to a tall man in uniform. Maria froze. The man was Officer Ben Riker. But the boy, he looked nothing like him. On the back of the photo, in faint pencil, someone had written, "He deserves better." She sat down slowly, heart beginning to race. The flash drive, the photo, the note. None of this had been random. It was a trail. A message from Ben, even if he hadn't lived to say it out loud. This wasn't just about corruption. It was about something personal. Maria walked the flash drive down to the department's tech specialist, Daryl Granger. Daryl was young, wore gaming T-shirts under his department-issued uniform, and was as brilliant with computers as he was awkward with conversation. She handed him the drive. "I need everything on it." Quietly. "Just you and me." He gave her a knowing nod. "Give me 30 minutes. She used the time to visit Shadow again. He was recovering faster than expected, though his leg would never quite be the same. Still, he was alert now, eyes following her with recognition and affection. She sat next to his crate, feeding him small bites of chicken from her pocket. "You and Ben were trying to tell us something, huh?" She whispered. "You weren't just exposing dirty cops. You were protecting someone." Shadow's ears perked up slightly, as if affirming her suspicion. 30 minutes later, Daryl waved her back. His face was pale. "There's more than just video on here," he said quietly, shutting the office door. "This thing contains encrypted case files, password protected. But I was able to break into some of them using metadata from the first flash drive." He turned his monitor to face her. "What you're about to see, it's heavy." Oh, she braced herself. The first file was a video time-stamped 6 months earlier. It showed Ben in a small, dimly lit room, likely his home. He looked tired, worn, and anxious. His voice trembled slightly as he spoke directly to the camera. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead, or missing, or being framed. I know that sounds dramatic, but I've seen enough now to know how these people operate. What started as suspicion has become certainty. Fairview isn't what it seems." He paused, rubbing his hands over his face. "It's not just the cops skimming drug money. There's a pipeline, an entire operation. Drugs being seized are being funneled back into the streets by the very people who claim to be fighting them. Businesses are being extorted. False warrants are being signed off. And it's all being protected under layers of red tape and loyalty. Ben looked off camera briefly, then back. I collected evidence, names, documents, audio. It's all here, spread across several drives. But the most important piece of this isn't about money or drugs. He reached into his pocket and held up the same photograph Maria now had. This boy, his name is Malik. He's 6. He's the son of a woman who came to me 3 months ago in tears. Her husband was murdered. Officially ruled a gang incident, but unofficially, off the books. It was a hit. He had witnessed a payoff involving 2 officers. He tried to go to the press. A week later, he was dead. Maria felt her stomach twist. Ben continued. Malik's mom begged me to protect him. She knew they might come for her next. And she was right. They tried to arrest her on bogus charges. Said she resisted. She didn't. They took her. She's gone. He leaned closer to the camera, voice growing hoarse. I've been taking care of Malik in secret. That's what the drawing is. He made it for Shadow. Said he wants to be a dog hero one day too. If you find this backpack, it means I didn't make it, but Shadow will. He knows where to go. Please protect the boy. Protect the truth. It's all I ask. The video ended. Maria sat in stunned silence. The pieces were coming together, and fast. This wasn't just departmental corruption. It was deeper, dirtier, more violent, and somewhere out there, a little boy named Malik had just lost the last adult willing to protect him. She stood up abruptly. Daryl, can you pull location data from this? Anything at all about where Malik might have been staying? Daryl nodded, already typing. Ben was smart. There's GPS metadata embedded in the video file headers. Looks like they were bouncing between safe houses. One address shows up more than once. An abandoned cabin off Route 18 near Clear Creek, about 20 minutes out of town. Maria didn't wait for backup. She grabbed her coat, radioed the chief with a brief update, and was in her cruiser within 5 minutes. As she approached the cabin, the air changed. It was early evening, and a gentle rain had begun to fall, painting the gravel road in shifting patterns of gray. Her headlights flicked over the sagging wooden porch and weathered roof. The place looked empty, except for the faint flicker of movement behind the curtain. She stepped out cautiously, one hand resting on her sidearm. She knocked. Silence. Then the sound of small feet. The door creaked open 2 inches. A single eye peeked out. The door opened wider. He was thin, paler than the boy in the photo. But the same eyes? Deep brown, cautious, but hopeful. I'm Officer Owens, she said gently. Ben sent me. He wanted you to be safe. The boy stepped back to let her in, clutching a small plush dog in his arms. The place was sparse. Just a mattress, a few boxes, and a worn backpack filled with coloring books. But it was clean. Protected. She saw a note taped to the fridge in Ben's handwriting. Stay brave. I'll always come back. She swallowed the lump in her throat. He's not coming back, is he? Malik asked softly. Maria knelt down to his level. No, sweetie. But he made sure you were safe. He did everything he could for you. Malik nodded, tears welling but not falling. Shadow's okay? He asked. Maria smiled. He's doing great, and he misses you. She drove him back to town that night, the boy asleep in the passenger seat, his head leaning on her arm. She made arrangements with social services, but not before personally calling a family she trusted, one that had been fostering kids for over a decade with warmth and love. Malik was welcomed with open arms, and within a week, Shadow came to visit. The reunion between dog and boy was something no camera could truly capture. Shadow, still limping, bolted the moment he saw Malik, tail wagging furiously. The boy hugged him tight, whispering secrets and promises only a child could make. From that moment on, the story of Shadow and the backpack was no longer just about crime and corruption. It was about redemption, about love, about the length someone, or some dog, would go to protect what truly mattered. Maria sat outside the foster home that night, watching through the window as Malik played with Shadow, his laughter echoing through the yard. A neighbor stepped outside and approached her car. "Hey, Officer Owens?" he said. "That the dog from the news?" She nodded. "He saved us," she replied simply. The man smiled. "Funny, isn't it? All this time we thought heroes wore capes or carried badges. Turns out some of them wear fur and drag backpacks through the mud." Maria laughed softly. "Yeah, and they don't stop, not even when they're bleeding." And in that moment, under a sky just beginning to clear, the town of Fairview began to heal, not because corruption had been rooted out, but because loyalty, love, and courage had stood taller than fear. All thanks to a wounded canine and the child he refused to abandon. The forest was darker than usual that day. Clouds thickened above the tree canopy, dimming the light and casting shifting shadows across the underbrush. The scent of pine and wet earth filled the air. Officer Ben Riker crouched low, whispering soft commands to Shadow as the dog moved in sync with him. The two had been partners for nearly 3 years, and though they had only been stationed in Fairview for 6 months, they operated as if their connection was born of something deeper, something elemental. Shadow paused, nose twitching. His eyes flicked up to meet Ben's. "You smell it too, don't you?" Ben muttered. The dog gave a soft growl in response. They weren't on a routine patrol. Not today. Ben had led Shadow to this part of Sector 6 for a reason. He'd intercepted a tip, one that confirmed what he'd been digging into for weeks. A drop was happening nearby, and the men involved wore badges. This wasn't about catching criminals from the outside anymore. It was about exposing them from within. He had tucked a small, high-definition body cam beneath his jacket. Another recording device was clipped to Shadow's collar, well hidden beneath the fur. He wasn't sure if he'd ever be able to use the footage. He wasn't even sure he would make it out of those woods. But he was sure of one thing. If anyone could carry the truth home, it was Shadow. Ben didn't tell anyone where he was going. Not the chief, not Maria, not even his sister who called every Sunday. If this went wrong, it would be because someone he trusted had sold him out. So he trusted no one except the dog at his side. They moved slowly through the brush, crouching behind a downed log. Voices echoed faintly in the distance, muffled by leaves, but familiar. Ben's heart pounded as he peeked over the edge of the log. 2 men stood beside a black SUV. One wore a sheriff's badge on his hip. The other, a patrol officer's jacket he recognized from the precinct. Between them, a large duffel bag sat half open, revealing rows of vacuum-sealed packets. Drugs. Ben could see the labels. He pressed the record button on the camera. "I thought we were supposed to log this batch," the younger officer said, his voice uncertain. The older man scoffed. "You want to end up like Simmons. Just log the dummy bag. This one gets picked up in an hour." Ben felt Shadow stiffen beside him. The dog sensed something, danger. His ears perked, nose twitching rapidly. Something was off. A twig snapped to their left. Ben turned. Another officer, one he didn't see before. The man raised a weapon. Ben lunged. Gunfire erupted. Shadow bolted. Chaos consumed the forest in an instant. Ben tackled the armed officer, shouting at Shadow. Geo, Shadow!" The dog hesitated. He looked back once, his instincts warring between duty and devotion. Another shot fired. Ben stumbled, blood blooming across his side. "Armbo!" Ben cried again, voice hoarse with pain. Shadow obeyed. The last thing Ben saw before darkness claimed him was his partner vanishing into the trees, carrying the backpack. Shadow ran like the wind, but not blindly. He zigzagged through the woods, ears attuned to every sound, heart hammering in rhythm with the storm of adrenaline rushing through him. His leg ached from a grazing bullet, a deep cut along his flank bled freely, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. Ben had trained him not just to attack or track, but to think, and Shadow knew the mission now. Go to the humans who can help take them the truth. Shadow avoided the trails he knew the corrupt officers might use. He took the long way, deeper into the woods, weaving through thorny underbrush, across shallow creeks, past a herd of startled deer. His body screamed in protest with every step. At one point, he collapsed from sheer exhaustion, panting heavily, eyes fluttering. But he remembered Ben's voice, that firm, steady tone, that look of trust. Only you, buddy. Only you can do this? And so, with a groan, Shadow forced himself up again. He walked, then limped, then crawled. By the time he reached the tree line near the town's edge, it was nearly dawn. His blood had matted into his fur. His vision swam, but the silhouette of the precinct glimmered in the distance, and that was all the fuel he needed. Each step was agony, each breath a prayer. He saw the patrol car before he saw the woman in it, Maria. She always brought him treats, always scratched his ears without hesitation, always treated him like more than a dog. Shadow limped into the open, and when Maria's eyes met his, wide with shock and fear, Shadow knew he had done it. He dropped the backpack at her feet and collapsed. The hours that followed were a blur, emergency lights, shouts, gentle hands lifting him, strange smells at the veterinary center, anesthesia, sleep. But through it all, Shadow held one thought. He had delivered the truth. The veterinarians worked tirelessly. The bullet wound was shallow, but the infection had set in. The leg injury was more complicated. Torn muscle, minor nerve damage. He'd never run the same way again. But he was alive, and Ben's message was now in the right hands. Shadow's recovery was slow. The kennel they kept him in at the clinic was soft, warm, and filled with familiar smells. Maria visited him every day. She brought chicken, spoke softly, and told him about Malik. She told him that Ben had saved the boy, that they'd found him, that he was safe. Sometimes she cried when she talked. Shadow would inch closer and nuzzle her hand. You knew, didn't you? She whispered one day. You understood everything. You didn't just run. You chose to run to us. Shadow blinked slowly. He didn't understand every word, but he understood her. Her voice, her scent, her sorrow. More officers came to visit. Those who were still honest, they brought treats. Some didn't speak, just stood in silence, watching him with awe. Shadow didn't need praise, but he could feel their gratitude in the air. One day, Malik came. The boy was timid at first, hiding behind his new foster parent's leg. But when he saw Shadow, still bandaged, tail gently wagging, his eyes lit up. Shadow!
He cried,
running forward. The dog lifted his head, ears perking. A low, happy whine escaped his throat. Malik wrapped his arms around him, burying his face in his neck. You came back, he whispered. Shadow licked his cheek gently. From that day on, Malik visited often. He brought hand-drawn pictures, little bones he'd saved up his allowance to buy, and sometimes just sat beside Shadow and talked. Story superheroes, about his mom and dad, about how he wanted to grow up to be a police officer, just like Ben. Shadow would lie still, listening, offering quiet comfort. As the weeks passed, Shadow was allowed more freedom. He walked slowly around the precinct courtyard. He was fitted with a support brace to help his leg heal correctly. He even began light training exercises with Maria again, not to return to duty, but to keep his mind sharp. His days of chasing suspects might be over, But he wasn't done serving. One morning, the department held a ceremony, not just for Ben, though he was honored with full honors and tears, but for Shadow. They presented him with the department Medal of Valor. Officers lined up to salute him. Malik stood at the front holding a small replica medal that matched Shadow's. When they placed it around his neck, the dog tilted his head, ears twitching at the applause. He didn't understand medals, but he understood that Ben would have smiled. Maria gave a speech that moved the crowd to silence. There's a saying, loyalty means nothing unless it has at its heart the absolute principle of self-sacrifice. Shadow didn't just risk his life. He gave everything to bring us the truth. He was the last one standing when his partner fell. He could have run. But he didn't. He came to us bloodied and broken because he believed we could make things right. And because of him, we did. The town watched in reverent silence. And in the weeks that followed, the story spread. News outlets picked it up. Wounded K9 Saves Town made national headlines. Offers poured in, documentaries, children's books, interviews. But Maria and the department kept it simple. Shadow remained in Fairview, now retired, living with a quiet family on a large farm just outside town. Malik visited often, and Maria, she came every Sunday with a tennis ball and a bag of chicken strips. Fairview began to heal, not because the corruption was gone entirely, but because something stronger had taken root. Faith in loyalty and courage, in silent protectors with fur and fierce hearts. And for those who still walked the line, who still wore the badge with honor, Shadow was a reminder that truth sometimes came on four legs, and that no matter how deep the darkness, bravery always found a way to shine through. The days after the ceremony passed like waves, rolling in quietly, cresting with emotion, and retreating into the deep waters of memory. Fairview, once a town content with its blind spots, was now wide-eyed, forced to reckon with the shadows it had let grow unchecked for far too long. It wasn't just about a few corrupt officers. It was about the culture, the silence, the collective shrug that had greeted years of suspicious evidence handling, unaccounted hours, missing reports, and whistleblowers who mysteriously transferred out of town. But now the silence had been broken, and in its place, something strange emerged, hope tangled with fear. Officer Maria Owens found herself in the middle of it all. She stood before the task force board in the conference room, a wall covered in names, connecting strings, reports, and photos. Some faces were circled in red, officers and town officials already suspended or under investigation. Others were outlined in yellow, those suspected but not yet formally charged, and a few, like hers, had no markings. They were still fighting, still standing, still trying to pull Fairview back from the brink. But no one could pretend anymore. Not after Shadow dragged that backpack through the mud and into the heart of the station. Not after Ben Riker's hidden footage was broadcast statewide. And certainly not after the boy, Malik, stood before the council holding Shadow's leash and said, "My mom used to tell me truth has a heartbeat, and you can hear it when people are really listening." His words had broken something open in the room that day. Hardened officers wiped their eyes. Journalists lowered their cameras. Even the mayor, who had until then maintained a cool, carefully curated detachment, seemed shaken. Maria thought of that moment now as she sat across from Detective Julian Marks in the department's internal affairs trailer. Marks was calm, clinical, and fair. He had a habit of tapping a pen against his notepad while he thought, and right now, that tapping filled the space between them. "I've reviewed your entire statement," he said. "Your account of Ben Riker's investigation lines up with what we found on both flash drives. We believe the third drive may have been destroyed or never found. but the evidence is sufficient to move forward with charges against at least 7 officers and 2 members of the Fairview City Council. Maria let out a long breath. And the rest, Marks paused the pen. There's still a lot of Rot Owens. Some of it's buried deep, but we're not done. She nodded. Good. We can't be. He studied her for a moment. You know, you could take a promotion. With this level of visibility and your role in uncovering all this, you could step into a state level position. Start fresh. Bigger precinct. Bigger budget. Cleaner slate. Maria smiled, but there was a heaviness behind it. Fairview's my town, she said, and you don't clean house by walking away from it. He gave her a small nod of respect. Then you're going to need people you can trust. She already had one, though he walked on 4 legs. Shadow had been officially retired, but he wasn't far. She'd insisted that he remain close, not just for comfort, but because he represented something pure, something incorruptible. When the town saw Shadow, they saw more than a hero. They saw the possibility of justice carried out without ego, without political weight, just instinct, loyalty, and unwavering truth. The public response to the entire saga had been overwhelming. Children sent hand-drawn letters to the department addressed to Shadow the Brave. Families left flowers at the foot of Ben Riker's grave. A mural went up overnight near City Hall, showing a massive pair of wings spread behind Shadow's silhouette, with the words, "Truth has 4 legs." But not everyone was celebrating. Whisper still floated around town. Some officers felt betrayed by the investigation. They argued that the methods used by Ben had violated protocol, that the footage was manipulated, that no good ever came from airing a town's dirty laundry in front of the world. Maria heard these whispers. She remembered each face. One afternoon, she found herself face to face with Officer Callahan, an older patrol cop with nearly 20 years on the force. He had always been quiet, reliable, and rarely involved in controversy, but now his eyes were cold as he stood by the lockers. "You've stirred up a hornet's nest, Owens?" he said. Maria raised an eyebrow. "You think we should have kept the lid on it?" He shrugged. "We could have handled it internally. Ben didn't have to die." Maria's voice hardened. "Ben died because we were too quiet for too long." Callahan shook his head. "You don't fix a family by burning down the house." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze. "No. But if the house is poisoning the people inside, you don't stay in it and pretend the mold isn't killing them." Callahan looked away, and Maria walked on. The pressure mounted. Court dates were scheduled. Officers were indicted. Protests and rallies filled the streets, some in support of reform, others denouncing the investigation as a witch hunt. But amid the noise, small victories shined. A community watch program began to take shape. Residents who once avoided police involvement now volunteered to participate. Kids from local schools started K-9 appreciation projects. Fairview's high school art department hosted an exhibition titled Loyalty, featuring student works inspired by Shadow's story. One sculpture, a rusted metal figure of a dog holding a backpack in its mouth. One state recognition. And then there was Malik. He had become the unlikely soul of the movement. His quiet strength, his resilience, and his unwavering love for Ben and Shadow made him a symbol for everything Fairview wanted to become. His new foster family was gentle and supportive, and Maria checked in often. One Sunday, as they sat on the porch watching Shadow Does in the sun, Malik looked up at her. "Do you think my mom would have been proud of me?" he asked. Maria swallowed a sudden lump in her throat. "She'd be proud of your heart," she said, "and of your courage. Not many people could go through what you've been through and still believe in goodness." He nodded solemnly. Then he said something that stayed with Maria for days. Ben told me once that courage isn't about being strong. It's about not letting fear make your choices. That night, Maria sat in her office and reopened Ben's case notes. They were detailed, meticulous. He had risked everything, not just for Malik, but for all of them. His courage had exposed the truth, but it was the ripple effect of that courage that was still unfolding. In the weeks that followed, a decision was made by the town council. Fairview would establish a permanent civilian oversight committee to review all police conduct, past and future. It would be composed of residents, officers, and independent experts. Maria volunteered to lead the integration between the department and the committee. There were moments when she faced pushback. Some colleagues withdrew, others resigned. But many remained, those who wanted to do better, to be better. And it was for them that she kept pushing forward. One morning, just after dawn, Maria stood with Shadow on the edge of Fairview's Central Park. The department had installed a small memorial stone beneath the old oak tree, the one Ben used to park near when walking Shadow. The engraving read, "In honor of Officer Ben Riker, who gave his life for truth, and Shadow, whose loyalty never wavered." Maria placed a single white flower at its base. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves above. Shadow stood beside her, silent, and in that moment, Maria understood something new. This story, Ben's, Malik's, Shadow's, was no longer just about the past. It was about the future, about a town rebuilding itself brick by brick, truth by truth, about people choosing to listen, even when it hurt, about healing that came not through forgetting, but through remembering differently. And as the sun broke through the trees, casting golden light across the stone and the sleeping dog at her feet, Maria made herself a quiet promise she would keep telling the story. Because stories change people, and people change the world. The seasons changed slowly in Fairview. What had begun with gunfire and grit faded into the quiet rhythms of recovery. Autumn leaves painted the sidewalks in amber and crimson, and the town, once frozen in the glare of national attention, began to exhale. But something fundamental had shifted. A deeper undercurrent pulsed through every street corner, city hall meeting, and late night diner conversation. The truth had emerged, and truth once seen could not be unseen. At the heart of that truth stood three names: Ben, Shadow, and Malik. The trio had become the moral compass of Fairview, not by decree, not by force, but by the echo of their courage. Theirs was a legacy not of perfection, but of persistence, of daring to act when silence was safer. For Maria Owens, the days were full but different now. The internal weight she used to carry, the tension between loyalty and justice, had given way to something cleaner, lighter. Not easier, but clearer. Her desk at the station now overlooked the memorial wall. She often found herself glancing at Ben's photograph. There were others beside it, officers from across the years, but his image held something no others did: a dog tag and a tiny paw print sealed in a frame beneath his badge. Maria had returned to active duty, though her new title included more weight than before: Lieutenant of Integrity, Oversight, and Community Relations. It was a mouthful, and it came with more paperwork than patrol, but she embraced it, because it meant she could ensure what happened to Ben, and nearly to Malik, would never happen again under her watch. On her first day in the new role, she brought Shadow with her. The department had given him a custom badge, a silver medallion engraved with Honorary Officer Shadow. He wore it on his collar as he limped slowly beside her, each step measured but proud. Though his body had aged, his spirit remained sharp. The young officers watched in respectful silence as Maria led Shadow into the newly renovated K-9 training facility. It had been renamed the Riker Center, and its motto, painted above the doorway, read loyalty above all. They trained a new generation of K9s, not just to pursue suspects or sniff out narcotics, but to comfort victims, protect children, and represent the empathy the badge was meant to uphold. Every new recruit was required to spend a full day shadowing Shadow. No pun intended. It wasn't long before word spread that the quiet K9, who rarely barked but never missed a cue, had a gift for reading people. Shadow could pick out deceit like a needle in hay. Maria swore he once growled during a background check meeting just as an applicant's sealed records came to light. Nobody argued with the dog. They called it Shadow's Law. Outside the department, Malik's life had bloomed like spring flowers after a long frost. He had stayed with the same foster family, the Wilsons, kind people with a garden, a library of books, and the sort of gentle laughter that reminded him of his mother's humming. At first, Malik had trouble sleeping. Nightmares would wake him, echoes of shouts, sirens, and distant gunfire. But slowly, with therapy, music, and Shadow curled beside his bed during overnight visits, the dreams softened. He'd taken to drawing again. At first, he sketched Shadow, dozens of versions. Shadow running, Shadow with wings, Shadow with a crown made of leaves. Then he moved on to Ben. It was harder. The memory came with both warmth and sting. But one afternoon, he finally finished a portrait Ben, kneeling beside Shadow, holding Malik's hand. He framed it and brought it to Maria. I think he would have smiled like this, Malik said, tapping the pencil-drawn mouth. Maria stared at the picture for a long time before nodding.
Yeah, that's him.
The drawing was placed in the station lobby for all to see. Malik was invited to speak at local schools. His voice, once so small and unsure, now rang with quiet conviction. Everyone has a backpack. He told a class of fourth graders one morning. Sometimes you carry your stuff. Sometimes you carry someone else's. But the best kind of backpack is one that has truth in it. Because even if you're scared or hurt, like Shadow was, you still have to deliver it. The kids clapped. A few wiped their eyes. The teacher called it the most powerful speech she'd ever heard from a 10-year-old. She told Maria, he doesn't speak like a child anymore. He speaks like someone who's already lived 1,000 lifetimes. And he had. In a way, they all had. Maria still wrestled with grief sometimes. In quiet moments, when the chaos subsided, she missed Ben with a sharp ache. They had never said everything. There had been promises half-formed, glances that lingered, a shared respect that might have bloomed into something more. But there had never been time. Instead, she poured that ache into her work, into every reform policy, every training she redesigned, every civilian complaint she personally investigated, not as a punishment, but as an invitation to build trust again. And the town responded. People who had once feared cops now waved at patrol cars. Children ran to K9 units during events. The department even created a Hero Hound day every spring, where dogs from all over came for an obstacle course and award ceremony. Shadow was the guest of honor, of course. He wore his vest, medals glinting in the sun, though he mostly preferred lying on the grass while Malik read him stories aloud. One summer afternoon, the mayor called an emergency press conference. Not for scandal, for once, but to make an announcement. After careful deliberation, she said, the city of Fairview has voted unanimously to erect a permanent statue downtown. Not just in honor of Officer Ben Riker, but of his partner, Shadow, and the truth they carried. It will stand not as a reminder of tragedy, but as a beacon of transformation. Construction began later that month. The base would be marble with bronze figures, Ben standing tall, one hand resting on Shadow's head, and Shadow carrying the infamous backpack. At the statue's feet, a quote from Malik, "Courage is when your heart is broken, but you still carry the truth." People from nearby towns came to see it. Some left notes. Others knelt in silence. It became a place of pilgrimage, not just for those mourning loss, but for those seeking purpose. Years passed. Malik grew. He excelled in school, then enrolled in a youth cadet program. By 16, he was volunteering at the precinct on weekends. By 18, he was given a full-ride scholarship to study criminal justice. Shadow grew older too. His muzzle turned white. His movements slowed. But his eyes never lost that spark. He lived his retirement surrounded by people who loved him, with a yard to roam, bones to chew, and Malik's voice to soothe him when joints ached in the cold. One winter night, snow fell softly over Fairview. Malik sat beside Shadow's bed, reading an old journal Ben had kept. He'd found it among Maria's belongings, a handwritten collection of thoughts and case notes. One entry caught his eye. If I ever go down, I hope it's fighting for something that matters. And I hope Shadow makes it out. He's got a bigger purpose than me. Maybe he'll teach someone how to be brave when I can't. Malik closed the book and looked at Shadow. Shadow. You did more than that, he whispered. Shadow lifted his head weakly and wagged his tail once, slow and deliberate. The next morning, Shadow passed peacefully in his sleep. Fairview mourned again, but this time, with reverence, not shock. They held a candlelight vigil. Children held photos. Officers stood at attention. Malik gave the final speech. He carried the truth. And in doing so, he carried all of us. Maria buried him beside Ben under the old oak tree. The stone simply reads Shadow, defender of truth, friend of the broken, hero without words. Life went on. New officers wore their badges with deeper awareness. Maria eventually rose to become chief of police. She kept Ben's journal in her desk drawer. Malik graduated, then returned to Fairview not just as a lawman, but as a symbol. People saw in him the continuation of the story. The boy who had once been lost found his way and returned to guide others. And through it all, the statue remained, untouched, unbowed, an eternal reminder that sometimes the world changes not through great armies or grand speeches, but through one wounded dog, one broken-hearted boy, and one honest man willing to risk everything for the truth. Fairview had been cracked wide open, but through the cracks, light poured in. And as long as that light remained, so did the memory of the ones who had carried it first. It had been 10 years since the wounded K9 dragged the truth to the doorstep of justice. 10 years since Shadow collapsed in a pool of his own blood, carrying the backpack that shook a town, and then a nation. A decade since Ben Riker gave his life to protect a boy who wasn't his responsibility, but became his purpose. Fairview looked different now. Not just the streets repaved and lined with trees planted by school children. Not just the precinct, which now included a civilian wing with transparent glass walls and meeting rooms named after whistleblowers and reformers. It was the soul of the place that had shifted. Where once suspicion filled the cracks between neighbors and officers, now there was cautious trust. Not perfect, never perfect, but lived, intested, and slowly earned. At the heart of it all stood a young man, Malik Riker, no longer the trembling boy clutching a leash beside a dying dog, but a confident, measured officer, the badge over his heart shining beneath the same name as the man who saved him. Riker wasn't his birth name, but the day he turned 18, he changed it by choice. Not because I belonged to him, he'd told Maria Owens when she signed as his witness, but because I want to remind the world what kind of man he was. She didn't cry in public often, but that day she did. Malik now patrolled the streets of Fairview, not with a gun on his hip, though he carried one, but with something heavier, the weight of memory. Every traffic stop, every community visit, every walk through the neighborhood he remembered. The fear, the betrayal, the moment when it all could have ended differently. if not for a bleeding dog and a good man who had refused to look away. And that memory shaped how he served. He greeted children by name, knew which businesses offered safe spaces for teens, partnered with social workers instead of relying on force. His presence wasn't about control. It was about connection. Still, there were moments when the old scars pulled tight, when a call came in that mirrored the past a little too closely, when a noise in the alley hit just the wrong pitch and a rush of panic surged through his chest. Those were the nights he sat under the statue, Ben and shadow cast in bronze, eternal and unblinking. He'd lean against the marble base, close his eyes, and listen to the wind. That's where Maria found him one evening, long after patrol hours had ended. She didn't speak at first, just sat beside him the way she used to when he was a boy, freshly orphaned and unsure of everything. After a while, Malik broke the silence.
It's been 10 years today, he said. Maria nodded. I know.
They sat for a while longer. The lights from the statue reflected off the polished marble, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. I keep thinking, Malik said slowly, about the people we never knew, the ones who never got justice, because there was no shadow, no Ben, no backpack full of evidence. Maria looked at him, her eyes steady. That's why we keep fighting, she said. Not for closure, for continuation. He nodded but didn't speak. Eventually, he pulled something from his coat, a small leather journal. The corners were frayed and the pages yellowed with age. Ben's, he said. His old journal. I've read it 100 times. Still feels like he's talking to me. Maria reached out, fingers brushing the cover. I have one too, she said. Started it after the hearings. Wrote every time we made a change. Every time someone said thank you or didn't. Malik smiled faintly. Maybe that's the legacy.
Not the headlines?
The writing, the remembering. They sat in silence again, 2 generations bound by memory and mission. That spring, Malik launched a youth initiative called Backpack Truth. The name honored Shadow's final act. The mission was simple. Teach young people how to speak truth, carry it with dignity, and protect it, even when the world wants them silent. It began with workshops, then grew into a non-profit, then spread to cities across the state. Stories poured in of kids reporting injustices, of teenagers organizing peer mediation groups, of middle schoolers refusing to let a classmate be unfairly punished. One 12-year-old from a small town near Reading wrote, I used to think I had to stay quiet to stay safe. Then I heard about the dog who carried the backpack and the boy who didn't give up. So I spoke up, and they listened. The letter hung in Malik's office. So did Shadow's collar, encased in a glass box with a tag that simply read, He carried us. As the nonprofit grew, Malik found himself pulled in more directions, press interviews, city planning boards, training seminars. His presence mattered, not just as a face for reform, but as a living example of what happens when someone survives injustice and chooses to transform it into service. But he never gave up patrol. He insisted on walking the streets at least twice a week. To remember, he told his staff, the minute we stop walking with the people, we lose the right to speak for them. It was during one of these walks that a boy ran up to him, maybe 9 or 10, barefoot, with grass-stained jeans and bright eyes. You the cop from the statue? The boy asked. Malik laughed softly.
Sort of. You had a dog.
Yeah,
Malik said. His name was Shadow. The boy grinned. I got a dog. His name's Justice. Malik knelt down. That's a good name. The boy nodded. He's not real brave, but I think he would have liked Shadow. I think Shadow would have liked him too. That night, Malik returned home, pulled out his own journal, and wrote Courage passes down, not like blood, like belief. One kid at a time. One choice at a time. A year later, the state unveiled a grant named after Ben Riker. It funded investigative journalism and whistleblower protections in small towns, places often overlooked. Malik attended the ceremony, standing beside Maria, who now served as state public safety advisor. Together, they spoke not about the past, but about the people still waiting to be heard. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Malik, "Do you ever think justice is finished?" Well, he looked out across the rows of students, officers, survivors. "No," he said. "Justice doesn't finish, it continues. Like a dog carrying a backpack through the dark, one step at a time." The quote went viral, but Malik didn't care about headlines. He cared about the next call. The next student, the next case, the next whisper of truth waiting to be heard. One evening, he stood once more beneath the statue. A light breeze stirred the trees. He placed a small box at the statue's base, a new collar, gleaming silver, with the name Legacy etched on it. It belonged to a young pup in training, Shadow's descendant. Different breed, same fire. Malik had chosen her himself. Because some stories never end, they're just passed on, carried forward. From paw print to footprint, from truth to transformation, from the wounded to the healed, and always, always forward. The story was never meant to leave Fairview. At least, that's what people thought in the beginning. A wounded dog, a fallen officer, a child saved. It felt like something sacred, something small towns whispered about over coffee and remembered during parades. It was local, intimate, untouchable. But the world had been watching. When Shadow dragged the backpack into the police station, collapsing in a bloody heap with Malik's faint sobs recorded on a body cam, it sparked national attention. But attention fades, headlines shift, stories dim. What no one predicted, what no one prepared for, was how this one wouldn't. Because something deeper lived inside it. It wasn't about a single dog or a single crime. It was about courage in the face of silence. It was about choosing truth when everything in the world made a case for convenience. And that choice? It echoed. In the 10th year following the incident, Backpack Truth had spread to over 40 states. What had started as workshops in Fairview community centers had turned into an international movement. Australia adopted a youth-led policing advisory board inspired by Malik's speeches. Norway passed legislation requiring every police officer to be assigned a civilian mentor during their first year. Kenya began training dogs not only for detection, but for trauma therapy, calling them Hope Hounds. In honor of Shadow, Malik sat in a small green room backstage at a human rights summit in The Hague, adjusting the collar of his modest navy jacket. His hair was neater now, and there was a gravity in his posture, someone who had known both boyhood terror and adult responsibility in equal measure. Maria Owens was seated beside him, flipping through her speech notes, now with streaks of silver in her dark hair. She didn't need the notes. She never did. But old habits were hard to shake. "You realize what this means, right?" she said softly, not looking up. He glanced over. "What?" "You're no longer just Fairview's story. You're the world's." Malik smiled, but it was a quiet smile. "I never wanted that," he said. "I just wanted people to stop pretending silence was harmless." Maria nodded. "They'll listen today. Not because of the badge, not even because of Shadow, but because you never gave up." The stage manager signaled them. The lights dimmed, and the doors opened. Malik stepped out to a standing ovation from an audience of world leaders, activists, educators, and survivors. Cameras flashed. Applause echoed. But he didn't raise his hand, he didn't bow. He just stood there breathing. Then he spoke, and his voice, once small and cracked in a Fairview police lobby, filled the hall like a bell. "You know my story. The dog. The officer. The backpack. You've read the headlines, watched the documentaries, but what you may not know is what didn't make the news. The years after, the quiet work, the daily choosing of truth over comfort. He paused. The world doesn't change because we punish the wrong. It changes because we protect the right. He held up a photo Ben kneeling beside Shadow, both looking off into some unseen future. I owe them my life. But what they taught me, that's what I owe the world. The room was still. And in that stillness, people saw it beyond the speech, beyond the stage. They saw the boy who had been voiceless, now giving voice to millions. That night, global media lit up. But Malik went back to his hotel room, pulled off the jacket, and opened his notebook. He wrote only one line. Truth doesn't belong to the brave. It belongs to the willing. 2 months later, a school teacher in rural Mississippi emailed Backpack Truth Headquarters. Her 5th grade class had read about Shadow, and the students wanted to start their own initiative, the Backpack Pledge. Every child who signed agreed to be a carrier of truth in their school. Soon, similar pledges popped up in classrooms in India, Argentina, Poland, and Japan. Teachers reported fewer bullying incidents. Kids wrote essays about courage. One 8-year-old from Lebanon wrote, I don't have a dog, but I have a voice, and I will use it. Meanwhile, back in Fairview, a new K9 was being trained. Her name was Legacy. Shadow's grand pup, fast, smart, fiercely loyal, but different. Her training included trauma response, classroom visits, and peaceful crowd management. She wore a custom vest that read, I carry more than orders. I carry hope. Malik would sometimes take her for early morning walks before sunrise. They'd pass the statue of Ben in Shadow, the bronze still gleaming after a decade. Legacy would always pause and sniff at the base, as if sensing something sacred. Malik would rest his hand on her head and whisper, They're watching. And she'd wag just once, as if to say, I know. One day, Malik received a call from the president's office. He was being awarded the Presidential Medal of Courage. He hesitated, not because he didn't feel honored, but because courage to him was never about medals. It was about moments, the small ones, the ones no one clapped for. But Maria reminded him, You're not accepting it for you, she said. You're accepting it for every kid who thinks no one will believe them. So he flew to Washington. He stood beside civil rights, giants, decorated veterans, and pioneering scientists. And when he was handed the medal, he held it up, but not toward the crowd. He turned toward the press cameras and said, This belongs to a dog who couldn't speak, but carried truth louder than any voice. The next morning, a young girl in Brazil found a stray dog outside her home. She named him Veritas, Latin for truth. She emailed Malik a photo of the dog with a handwritten caption, If he carries it, I will too. And so the story moved, not just from hand to hand, but heart to heart, across oceans, cultures, languages. Ben's journal was published posthumously, edited by Maria and Malik. Titled Carry the Truth, it became a bestseller, not because it was sensational, but because it was honest, raw, human. An excerpt from Ben's final entry was engraved at the entrance of the United Nations Youth Assembly 2 years later. The real badge isn't on your chest. It's in your choices. Carry that, and you'll never walk alone. By now, Shadow had become a global symbol, not just of loyalty, but of defiant truth. Statues appeared in public parks. Children's books told his story. Therapy dogs were named after him. And perhaps most moving of all, thousands of people worldwide got tattoos of a small paw print over a heart. They called it the Shadow Mark. Maria often traveled with Malik now, training new departments, consulting on reform legislation, speaking to crowds that once would have doubted her. Her badge was heavier now, not from weight, but from meaning. I wear it She told a graduating class of officers, "Not because I trust power, but because I believe it can be worthy of trust." The world changed, slowly, painfully, but it changed, and not because it was easy. Because one dog, one officer, and one boy chose to believe that truth deserved a chance, even when wounded. One summer, as Fairview prepared for its 20th annual Harrowhound Day, Malik stood at the edge of the crowd, Legacy at his side. Children ran past, laughing. Families picnicked beneath banners that read, "Walk with Truth." An elderly man approached. He was quiet with a lined face and faded cap. "You the boy from the story?" he asked. Malik nodded. "Not a boy anymore." The man smiled. "Still carrying the backpack?" Malik looked down at Legacy, then out at the children playing. "Always?" he said. The man tipped his cap.
Then the world's in good hands.
That night, under the stars, Malik sat on a bench overlooking the statue. He pulled out his journal and wrote, "We never really let go of the backpack. We just learned to share the weight, and in that sharing, the world learns to stand a little taller." Then he closed the book and watched the stars, knowing somewhere, on some street, in some town, a new child was picking up the truth and choosing to carry it forward. The museum stood quietly on the hill overlooking Fairview. From a distance, it didn't look like much, just a long, low building with a metal roof and big windows that caught the golden morning light. But up close, it hummed with something deeper. Inside those walls, stories lived, not behind glass like relics of a distant past, but on touchscreens, worn uniforms, dog tags, handwritten notes, children's letters, and the faint smell of leather and cedar wood. It was called the Center for Everyday Courage. And in the lobby, right at the entrance, stood a glass case containing one worn leather backpack, faded, a little torn at the straps, dried blood still staining the edges. A small sign beneath it read, "Carried by Shadow." Carried by truth? Found by us all? Visitors didn't just take pictures. They stood still, sometimes in tears, because to understand what that backpack represented was to understand what courage really meant. Not grandeur, not bravado, but the quiet resistance of choosing what's right, even when no one else does. Malik stood before the case now, years older, his once youthful face etched with lines of experience and earned wisdom. He came often, alone. It was his place to reconnect, to be reminded. Today, he wasn't alone. A small girl stood beside him, 9, maybe 10, curly hair tied back in a neat ponytail, her fingers wrapped around a small notebook. "Is it real?" she asked, pointing to the backpack. "It is,"
Malik said.
She hesitated.
Did the dog really carry it?
Malik crouched beside her.
Yes.
He said. He was hurt, but he didn't stop. He carried it all the way to the station because someone needed help. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Was it your dog?" Malik smiled. Not at first.
But in the end, yes, he was mine.
She nodded slowly, then whispered, was very brave. "Yes, he was." They stood in silence, generations apart, but tethered by the same truth. The little girl turned to him and asked something no one had ever asked him directly. "Were you scared?" Malik's throat tightened. "Every day," he said. "But you still told the truth." He nodded, even when it hurt. "Especially then." She didn't say anything more. She just reached out, placed her small hand on the glass, and whispered, "Thank you, Shadow." Malik watched her walk away, her notebook tucked under her arm, a quiet resolve in her step. He knew she'd never forget this moment, just as he never forgot his. The museum had only been open a year, but already it had welcomed over 300,000 visitors. Schools made field trips of it. Police academies made it part of their ethics training. Survivors of abuse, corruption, and silence came to sit in its reflection garden, where benches bore names not of heroes, but of those who carried the truth quietly, without recognition. Malik had insisted on that. This place isn't for statues, he'd told the architect. It's for reminders. Behind the exhibit halls, in the library wing, volunteers were scanning hundreds of journals, documents, testimonies, and letters. Each told a story, not always loud, not always clear, but always brave. Among them was a restored copy of Ben Riker's final report, the one he never submitted. It ended with this line: "If we are lucky, we get one moment where we can choose not to look away."
That's all.
Just one. But it's enough to change everything. That quote now wrapped around the museum's inner rotunda, etched in steel and light. And though the world had grown louder, faster, more digital, more impatient, people still came. Still paused. Still wept. Malik often thought of Shadow in those moments. Not just the dog himself, but the idea of him. The loyalty. The endurance. The pain endured in silence, not for reward, but for the sake of someone else's chance at life. There were days when Malik wondered how long the world would remember, if the next generation would forget the price paid in blood and bone. But then he'd see something, a child drawing Shadow with crayons, or a group of teens leading a justice circle in their school, and the doubt faded. Legacy still served with the department. Older now, her muzzle dusted with gray. She moved slower, but with the same deliberate energy. She had saved 3 lives, helped de-escalate over a dozen violent incidents, and every morning Malik clipped on her vest and whispered, "You carry us now?" One summer, a journalist from London flew in to write a piece titled "The Dog That Changed the World." She followed Malik for a week, watched him speak at schools, visit prisons, counsel grieving families, and train new officers. She expected grand gestures. But what struck her most was the smallness of it all. He listens more than he talks, she wrote. In a world addicted to noise, he chooses presence. The article went viral, but Malik barely read it. He was too busy responding to a letter from a teenager in Chicago who had found the strength to report an abusive teacher after reading about Shadow. "I wanted to quit," the teen wrote. "Then I remembered a dog dragged a whole backpack while bleeding. If he didn't stop, I won't either." Malik framed that letter. Alongside it, another, one from Maria, written shortly before her retirement. "Malik, you made it matter. You made his sacrifice something living, something growing. If Shadow were here, he wouldn't want a statue. He'd want you to keep walking. So don't stop, not ever." And he didn't. He walked, city to city, school to school, until one day, decades later, a much older Malik Riker stood before a crowd at the Center for Everyday Courage, now expanded and renamed the Shadow Initiative for Global Truth and Justice. He no longer wore a uniform, no longer walked with a dog at his side, but his presence, steady, calm, certain, still filled a room. He looked out at the faces before him, young officers, students, activists, parents, and he spoke. Some of you know the story. Some of you don't, but whether you remember the dog's name or the boys or the officers, what matters is that you remember the choice. He paused, letting silence settle. The choice to carry truth when it's heavy, to speak when it's costly, to move when you'd rather freeze. He placed a hand over his heart. "I don't carry a badge anymore, but I carry something more important. I carry you, your courage, your voices, your fight." He pointed to a small plaque mounted beside the podium. It read, "The burden we share becomes the bridge we build." Then he stepped down. No fanfare, no music, just quiet reverence. And as he walked out into the twilight, a young child ran up to him. She was barefoot, laughing, holding a stuffed dog. "His name's Shadow," she said proudly. Malik smiled. "He's a good one." She nodded. "He doesn't talk much, but he listens real good." Malik bent down, his eyes misting. That's the most important thing a hero can do. The child beamed and ran off, and Malik stood there for a long moment, breathing in the night air. The stars above him, the stories behind him, the future still waiting to be written. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn object. The same journal he'd carried for years. He opened to a blank page, wrote slowly, deliberately, "There will always be silence, but there will also always be someone willing to speak into it. Carry your truth, and carry it well." Then he closed the book and walked forward, still carrying the weight, but never alone.